This is the Strong is a Mindset podcast, episode number 189. Most of us already know what we're supposed to do. The harder part is staying with it when nothing dramatic is happening. That's what this episode is about. This is the Strong is a Mindset podcast, where you'll learn how to build both a strong body and a strong mind by eating, moving, and thinking. I'm your host, physician, personal trainer, certified health coach, and certified life coach, Carrie Holland. Hey, how are you? What's new? What's good? So, what's good here? Well, we're going in a different direction today. I was looking back at the last few episodes I've recorded, which were pretty teaching heavy and more nutrition and habit heavy. And that makes sense for the beginning of the year when it's January and there are lots of questions about how to eat and exercise and get healthy. But this week, I wanted to offer something a little different. So instead of another episode about what to do or how to do it better, I want to slow things down a little and talk about what sits underneath all of that. Because here's the thing I see over and over again, both in my clients and in myself. Most of us know a lot. We know what supports us and what doesn't. We know what helps our eating go smoothly. We know that movement and exercise make us feel better. We know what boundaries we probably need. We know the thoughts and negative self-talk that don't help us. But knowing all of that does not mean it's automatic. It doesn't mean you'll do it perfectly. It doesn't mean it suddenly feels easy. And it definitely doesn't mean you're done. So that gap between knowing and doing, it's an important one. It's where a lot of frustration lives. And it's also where a belief can creep in that if you were just better at this, it wouldn't feel so hard. And I don't think we talk about that part enough, but we're going to change that today. So this episode isn't advice. This is not a framework. Really, it's just honesty, straight up. I want to share with you a few things I know now, not because they're trendy, but because they've held up over time in my own life and in my work with clients. And right alongside that, I want to share a few of the many things that I'm still practicing. Not because I'm behind, not because I haven't figured things out, but because this work, the eating, the moving, the thinking, the emotional stuff, none of that ever really becomes set it and forget it. I do this stuff for a living, and I still practice it every day. So if you ever catch yourself thinking, I know this, or I know what to do, but why is this still hard? Or shouldn't I be past this by now? Please know that you are not alone. And this episode is really just a conversation from someone who knows some things, is still practicing a lot of things, and is very much a human inside all of it. All right, so let's go. So let me start with a few things I know. One thing I know and feel pretty confident in now, and after coaching people for over 6 years, is that there is no one right way to do fitness. There is no one right way to be healthy. I notice how often women come to me wanting exact answers, the right way to eat, the right plan, the right macros, the right strength training guide. And I get it. I get why. And I wanted that too for a long time. From my own personal experience, I've eaten a lot of different ways over the years. High carb, low carb, intermittent fasting, steak for breakfast. I've tried a little bit of everything. I've also written myself all different kinds of strength training plans. And I've seen clients succeed through multiple different approaches too. And what I've learned is that success doesn't come from the method. Really, it comes from whether the method is livable. So whether it holds up in your real, busy, sometimes messy life. So I've said it in innumerable podcasts before, but it's something I had to learn the hard way. The plan itself isn't what makes things work. I've had plans that looked amazing on paper that fell apart the second my life got busy. And I've had simpler plans that held up because I could actually live and function within them, and they didn't feel like a part-time job to maintain. So to be clear, yes, it is important to have some sort of plan for eating and moving because that's your strategy. That is your groundwork. You can't just expect to wing it with your food or exercise and see success. But the minutia of the plan, how many carbs, how much protein, how often to eat, how many shoulder exercises to do, and in what order, none of those things really matter if you can't sustain it. The plan really doesn't matter if it falls apart the second your life gets busy, which happens often for so many of us, all right? And here's another thing I know now, and this one took me a long time to learn. This one is about nutrition specifically. For years, I believed that my goal was to eat as little as possible, not in a dramatic way, not intentionally extreme, just less. less food, less fuel, less calories. And I lived that way for a long time. But what I didn't realize at the time was how much that belief was totally working against me. At the time, it felt responsible, controlled, even disciplined. But looking back, I can see that I was trying to build a strong body and build health on not enough fuel. And what eventually became very clear to me is this. If you want to be strong, if you want muscle, if you want a body that feels good to actually live in, you have to eat. Not perfectly, not obsessively, but enough, like real food, carbs, protein, fiber, actual food. And interestingly, I did not learn that lesson through theory or research or coaching. I learned it through natural bodybuilding, which I know might raise an eyebrow because bodybuilding does not exactly have a great reputation when it comes to food or body image. And in many cases, that reputation is earned because it can absolutely go sideways. But for me, I feel very lucky in how that season of my life played out. Because what bodybuilding taught me was not how to restrict. Instead, it taught me how impossible it is to get strong without eating. Once I started lifting heavy, like super heavy, there was no hiding from it. My body made it very clear that you cannot adequately fuel your muscles with a handful of Cheetos and a turkey sandwich and expect a killer physique. Or at least I couldn't. So I saw in real time that trying to get by on too little food just did not work. Not for performance, not for progress, and certainly not for feeling good. And for me, that realization actually brought relief. It shifted my entire relationship with eating. Food stopped being something to minimize and started becoming something functional and essential to my health and fitness goals. And yes, there were moments where I had to let go of the fear that eating more would somehow send me off the rails. But what I learned was that fueling myself appropriately did not make me lose control. It was actually the opposite because I wasn't running around hungry all the time. So eating to fuel my body instead of shrink my body made me stronger, more stable, and more consistent. And that is what I really want you to hear. So let me be clear. I'm not here to turn you into a bodybuilder. I understand that most of you listening have zero desire to step on a stage, and that is completely fine. That was never the point. The point is the lesson I took from that season. That trying to scrounge by on too little food always catches up with you. Sometimes slowly, sometimes very loudly. Sometimes it shows up as stalled progress. Other times it shows up as low energy. Other times it shows up as being hangry or irritable. And very often it shows up as overeating later. And it's not because you don't have discipline, it's because your body gets tired of just getting by. And that was a hard thing for me to accept at first, but that lesson has stayed with me far beyond bodybuilding. Once I experienced that kind of growth, where my progress required patience, consistency, and a willingness to stay in it even when it felt uncomfortable, I started finding that pattern in other parts of my life: food, exercise, mindset, career, relationships. And what I realized both for myself and for the women I coach is that people often stop because progress doesn't look the way they expected it to. When progress isn't obvious or dramatic, they assume it doesn't count. And if it doesn't feel like it's working, they either abandon it or they swing in the opposite direction and go even bigger. And that's usually where things fall apart. And one of the most consistent patterns I've seen in all my years of coaching is this. The changes people dismiss as too small are often the exact ones that end up working. And I've come to believe that deep in my bones now, not because it sounds good, but because I have watched it play out too many times to ignore. Small progress really does count. And I know that sounds totally obvious, totally cliche. There are entire books written about this. Atomic Habits, Tiny Habits, The Progress Principle. They all say the same thing, but in a different way. And the underlying message is that small progress is still progress. But despite this, despite the books and the podcasts and the Instagram quotes, I still see so many women completely discount small change. For many of the high-achieving women I work with, if it's not big or bold or dramatic, it doesn't count. It doesn't feel impressive enough. It doesn't feel significant or substantial enough. It doesn't feel like it should work. So they respond by aiming higher. They overhaul everything. They decide this time they're going all in. New plan, new rules, new expectations. And for a short window of time, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, it feels good. It feels motivating. And then real life shows up. And when work gets busy or something unexpected happens, the plan that was working becomes impossible to maintain. And that's when the crash happens. And what I've seen and what I've experienced myself is that it's not that people aren't capable of change. Instead, it's that they're trying to change at a pace that is not compatible with their actual lives. And I get it. Small changes, they do not feel satisfying at first. Eating a salad with dinner instead of fries, not as dramatic as starting keto. Going for a 10-minute walk, not as dramatic as starting Orange Theory at 5 a.m. every day. So that salad and that 10-minute walk don't give you the same sense of momentum. They don't make a great before and after story. And often, because of that, people assume they're pointless. But here's the part that's hard to see until you've actually lived it. Small changes are often the only ones that you can still do when life isn't cooperating. And I've watched women resist that idea for months, sometimes even years. They've convinced themselves that if they're not doing something big and dramatic, they're wasting their time. And almost without fail, it's only after they finally scale things back, slow things down, and make the change small enough to repeat that things start to shift. So not overnight, not dramatic, not flashy, just habits that are small enough to actually last. And what I know now is that progress doesn't always feel like progress in the moment. In fact, often it feels really boring. Sometimes it feels totally underwhelming. Sometimes it feels like you should be doing more. But when you zoom out weeks later or even months later, that's usually where the real change has been happening, in the small stuff. And the women who end up feeling the most steady, the most confident, and the most trusting in themselves, they're the ones who stayed with themselves. They made changes that were small enough to sustain. They stopped dismissing small changes just because they didn't feel bold. And over time, that's what actually moved the needle. And I want to be clear, sharing all of this isn't me saying that this is easy or that once you know these things, everything suddenly clicks. Because even with all of this, with years of doing this work, there are still many places where I am very much practicing. And one of the biggest things I'm still practicing is patience. And not patience in a vague, good things take time kind of way. I mean the kind of patience that's uncomfortable because there is no immediate feedback. There's no clear signal that what you're doing is working. Despite all the tools and everything I've learned, I still notice how quickly I want things to move, how easy it is to feel restless, how I want reassurance that what I'm doing is enough and that it's going somewhere. And I know, intellectually anyway, that small, steady progress is what actually lasts. I just spent a whole section of this episode talking about that. But regardless of what I know, I still feel the pull to rush sometimes. I want clearer proof that I'm on the right track. It shows up in my fitness and exercise, but it also shows up in my work. It shows up in my business. It most definitely shows up in my thinking. There are things I want to do, speak more, expand my reach, run a group program, and I hesitate. Not because I don't believe in the work, but because I don't love not knowing how it will land. And it's tempting for me to pull back and do nothing at all under the guise of not being ready. I am really good at telling myself I just need a little more time. So patience for me looks like resisting that urge. It looks like continuing to show up consistently, even when there isn't immediate feedback. It looks like not forcing things to be impressive just so I can feel more certain. It also looks like trusting that something can be building even when it's quiet. And that's what I'm doing. I piloted a very small group program almost a year ago, and I was insanely nervous and afraid to try it. I almost talked myself out of doing it altogether, and I'm so glad I didn't, because that group has been amazing and has continued for another 2 rounds beyond the initial one. And now I'm in the position of figuring out what to do with that information. And the only way I got that information was by being patient enough to try something before I felt ready, instead of waiting for certainty that was never going to come. And another thing I'm still practicing is staying engaged when things feel uncomfortable. So this one is really hard for me, and it's where I feel I probably have the longest road ahead. My default when life gets hard or when things feel heavy is to shut down. I go numb. I get very efficient. I stop looking too closely at what I'm feeling. It is so much easier to be a machine and just keep doing. It's easier not to feel, even though I know that's not the answer. So what I'm still practicing, and probably will still be practicing until I'm no longer on this earth, is allowing emotions to be there without immediately trying to fix them, explain them, or shove them into a corner. I think I'm good at thinking about feelings, but I'm not always great at actually feeling them. I've gotten much better at noticing when I'm spiraling or withdrawing, and I count that as progress. Previously, I would have defaulted to autopilot without even realizing it was happening. It would be automatic. Things get hard, I turn off. That was my default. But now, even if I do revert, I get back to myself faster. I remind myself that I'm an adult now. I choose how I respond. I am not a victim of old patterns, even when they show up again. And I have lots of opportunities to remind myself of that, whether that's in my business or with my parents or even in my own marriage. There are lots and lots of opportunities for me to practice staying engaged. And that practice of staying with myself when things feel messy, instead of checking out, that is the part that matters. Honestly, that's the part that matters more than getting it right, than getting the A+. And I think one of the biggest surprises in all of this work has been realizing that growth doesn't actually feel good most of the time. So here's a big secret that's really not so much of a secret, but I want to shout this out. I used to think that if I was doing this work well, that if I was thinking better, living better, or taking better care of myself, that it would feel easier. And here's the thing, it doesn't. In fact, it often feels harder. If you're really in it and you're committed to this work, you're more aware. You notice more. You feel more. You pay attention more. And you don't turn and run and hide as easily when things get hard. And none of that is easy. And this concept has held true in every single part of my life where I've experienced growth. In my career, that meant leaving clinical medicine to become a coach. It meant starting this podcast. It meant writing hour-long talks and standing on stage to deliver them. None of those decisions came with certainty. Every single one required me to tolerate a whole lot of discomfort and a whole lot of not knowing how things would turn out. In my fitness, it showed up in very concrete ways. Doing triathlons meant learning how to swim, and not just in a pool, but in open water. Getting back into road racing after a long hiatus meant tempo runs and interval workouts, which are hard and uncomfortable by design. None of that felt easy at the time, but avoiding it wouldn't have gotten me anywhere. In my relationships with my parents, growth has meant setting and holding boundaries. It's meant disappointing lots of people who had expectations of who I should be now based on who I was in the past and the role I used to play. It's meant feeling serious guilt about not having a typical parent-child relationship and learning to let that be okay because there isn't another healthy option. And absolutely none of that has been comfortable. And in my marriage, growth has meant confronting things and not just pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's meant being willing to have hard conversations so that old patterns don't keep repeating themselves. And that level of honesty is not comfortable, but it's been absolutely worth it. And I could go on here with loads more examples, but the point is this. In every area of my life where real growth has happened, it's been uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable. But I've learned that discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. Discomfort is not a red flag. It's usually a sign that things are changing, that I'm paying attention instead of avoiding, that I'm doing something different than I've done before. And once I really understood that, it changed how I relate to it. If I want to keep growing in my work, in my health, in my relationships, then I know discomfort is part of the deal. It's not something to avoid or get rid of, but it's something to manage. Huge difference. And I'm okay with that now. Not because it's easy, but because I've given myself enough evidence that I can handle it, and that staying with that discomfort has led to some of the best things in my life. So, when I zoom out and look at everything I've talked about here, the things I know and the things I'm still practicing, what stands out to me is not a specific rule or takeaway. Instead, it's how so much of this work of self-improvement is really about staying with yourself longer than you want to, and how most of the meaningful change happens in the moments that do not feel like much at all. Most of us already know what we need to do. We know it helps. We know it steadies our eating. We know that movement matters. We know when we're pushing too hard or avoiding something uncomfortable. And knowing is generally not the hard part. What's harder is staying engaged and staying in it when progress is slow and subtle, when there's no obvious payoff yet, and when you can't tell if it's actually working. That's usually where people get uncomfortable. Not because anything's wrong, but because nothing dramatic is happening. Progress feels slow, feedback is unclear, and that's often when the urge to change the plan, do more, or scrap it altogether shows up. And so for a long time, I thought growth would feel more decisive than this. Like you reach a point where things click and suddenly it just stays easier. But that has not been my experience. What I've seen instead, both in my own life and in my work with clients, is that real change tends to look pretty ordinary while it's happening. And it's the small but impactful decisions that you keep making. It's not panicking when things feel new or uncertain. It's not assuming you need to overhaul everything just because you're bored or uncomfortable. None of that feels impressive in the moment. But when you look back later, that is usually where the change actually came from. So if this episode felt a little quieter than usual, that is on purpose. And if it didn't wrap everything up neatly, that's because this work doesn't really do that. Most of the change I've experienced didn't happen in big moments or in bold decisions. The change happened in the middle, in the boring, quiet stretches where nothing looked different, but I kept going anyway. And life keeps reminding me that I am still in that middle in a lot of ways. I am still practicing. I still catch myself wanting clearer answers or faster feedback, and I don't see that as a problem anymore. Now, I see that as part of how this process of change actually works. And if you found yourself nodding along while listening to this episode, this is essentially the work I do with people. Not fixing you, not overhauling your life, just helping you slow things down and make changes that you don't have to keep restarting. So if you're curious about coaching, you can find me at www.carriehollandmd.com/contact. All right. Thank you again for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you again next week. Hey, if you want to build muscle but don't know where to start, I've got you covered. Head over to carriehollandmd.com/buildstrength and download my free guide to help you maximize your strength training. Inside, you'll find the essential exercises for building muscle, plus simple 1, 2, and 3-day workout plans that you can follow with just dumbbells and a bench. You'll also find strength training tips to help you train smarter and see real results. My goal is to help you get strong, and this strength training guide will help you do it. Go to carriehollandmd.com/buildstrength and check it out. Thank you for listening to the Strong is a Mindset podcast. If you want to learn more about how to build both a strong mind and a strong body by eating, moving, and most importantly, thinking, check out carriehollandmd.com.